Can someone use humans to entertain themselves? Up until now, if you think that black slaves were used only for laborious work, then you are mistaken. At that time, these individuals were treated as pure commodities, used for work and entertainment. The white masters treated them similarly to how a child would treat a toy for their amusement, and nothing more brutal than this could be done. But what were those acts that no one dares to talk about? Let's find out.
The Black History Archives.
Slave torture as entertainment. During the dark period of slavery in the United States, slaveholders often sought ways to exert control over their slaves through fear and intimidation. One particularly heinous aspect of this control was the organization of events that revolved around the torture and suffering of slaves, all for the entertainment of the white audience. One such grotesque act was the running of the slaves. In this dehumanizing event, slaves were subjected to intense physical challenges, often involving being chased and whipped by dogs. The goal was not only to showcase the physical prowess of the dogs, but also to instill fear and obedience in the enslaved population. The atmosphere during these events was similar to a carnival or spectacle, with white spectators cheering on the cruelty inflicted upon the slaves. For the slaveholders, it served as a means of asserting their dominance and reinforcing the social hierarchy of the time. These events were not isolated occurrences, but rather part of a larger system of exploitation and dehumanization that characterized the institution of slavery. They reinforced the notion of slaves as property rather than human beings to be used and discarded at the whim of their owners. And the motivation behind this was just fun. The owners were doing it to have fun. Slave fighting. Slaveholders in various parts of the world subjected their enslaved individuals to the horrors of forced combat for the entertainment of spectators. These barbaric events mirrored the bloodthirsty nature of ancient Rome's arenas, with enslaved people pitted against each other or other animals in brutal fights where injury or death was all too common. Much like modern-day sporting events, these fights were organized with meticulous attention to detail. Viewers would gather, placing bets on the match's outcomes, further dehumanizing the participants by reducing them to mere objects of amusement and profit. Here's a reminder to please support us so we can make more videos for you by subscribing to our channel and giving the video a like. We want to build a strong community and we need your support. Let's continue now. Enslaved individuals were coerced into participating in these fights under the threat of severe punishment or even death. They had no choice but to endure the physical and psychological trauma inflicted upon them by their merciless masters. The fights themselves were often vicious and brutal, with participants forced to engage in life or death struggles with little regard for their safety or well-being. Some were made to fight each other, while others were pitted against animals such as dogs or bears, amplifying the spectacle's savagery. The aftermath of these fights was marked by bloodshed and suffering. Many participants were left with debilitating injuries, while others paid the ultimate price, losing their lives in the name of entertainment. These horrors of cruelty serve as a chilling reminder of humanity's capacity for violence and exploitation. They underscore the profound injustices inherent in the institution of slavery and the lengths to which oppressors would go to maintain their power and privilege. Hunting escaped slaves. Among the most chilling and dehumanizing practices of slavery was the pursuit of escaped slaves by particularly cruel slaveholders. These events, known as slave hunts, were orchestrated with the sole purpose of tracking down and capturing fleeing individuals as if they were nothing more than wild animals. For the slaveholders involved, these hunts were not merely about reclaiming lost property, but rather about exerting power and control over their enslaved population. The thrill of the chase and the sense of dominance over another human being were central to the perverse enjoyment derived from these barbaric activities. The organization of a slave hunt was a meticulously planned affair, often involving the collaboration of multiple slaveholders and their associates. Dogs trained to track human scent would be unleashed, and armed parties would set out into the wilderness in pursuit of their prey. The experience for the escaped slaves was one of constant fear and desperation as they evaded capture, knowing that failure meant a return to a life of bondage and brutality. Many endured unimaginable hardships during their flight, risking injury, starvation, and death in their quest for freedom. For the slaveholders, the successful capture of an escaped slave was not only a demonstration of their prowess as hunters, but also a reaffirmation of their authority over the enslaved population. It served as a chilling reminder to other slaves of the consequences of disobedience and rebellion, mockery and ridicule. In the twisted world of slavery, where human beings were treated as mere property, slaveholders often found entertainment in subjecting their slaves to acts of mockery and ridicule. These cruel and degrading practices served to reinforce the power imbalance between master and slave, while also amusing the oppressors at the expense of the oppressed. One common form of mockery involved dressing slaves in ridiculous costumes or outfits designed to humiliate and debase them. Whether it was oversized clothing, outlandish hats, or other absurd garments, these costumes served to reduce the dignity of the enslaved individuals and highlight their status as objects of ridicule. Slaveholders would also force their slaves to perform humiliating tasks or participate in degrading jokes and skits for their amusement. This could involve making them dance, sing, or engage in demeaning activities that served no purpose but to entertain the master and his guests. The psychological impact of mockery and ridicule cannot be overstated. They serve to erode the self-esteem and sense of worth of the enslaved individuals, reinforcing their status as inferior beings in the eyes of their oppressors. For the slaveholders, engaging in such behavior provided a sense of power and superiority, further entrenching the oppressive dynamics of the institution of slavery. It allowed them to assert their dominance over their slaves in the most demeaning and dehumanizing ways possible. Sexual exploitation parties. Among the most appalling aspects of slavery were the sexual exploitation parties hosted by some plantation owners. These gatherings were not only symbolic of the pervasive dehumanization of enslaved individuals, but also highlighted the utter disregard for their dignity and autonomy. During these parties, enslaved individuals, particularly women, were treated as mere objects to be used for the sexual pleasure of the white guests. Plantation owners would essentially offer enslaved women, often referred to as fancy maids, as prizes or entertainment for their guests, perpetuating the notion that they were nothing more than commodities to be bought, sold, and used at will. The atmosphere at these parties was one of rampant exploitation and degradation. Enslaved women were subjected to unwanted advances, coercion, and sexual violence, with little to no recourse for protection or justice. Their bodies were treated as disposable playthings, their humanity stripped away by the whims of their masters and their guests. Psychological manipulation and mind games. Some masters resorted to insidious forms of psychological manipulation and mind games to exert control over their enslaved individuals. These tactics were not only a means of asserting dominance, but also a way for the master to derive amusement from the suffering and confusion of those under their power. Gaslighting, a form of psychological manipulation aimed at making the victim doubt their reality, was frequently employed by cruel masters. They would distort the truth, manipulate events, and deny the experiences of their slaves, leaving them feeling confused, disoriented, and powerless. By undermining their sense of reality, the master could further assert their control over the enslaved individual's thoughts and actions. False promises were another common tool used by masters to manipulate their slaves. Whether it was the promise of freedom, better treatment, or other rewards, these false assurances served to instill false hope and compliance in enslaved individuals. However, the promises were rarely fulfilled, leaving the slaves disillusioned and further entangled in their master's grip. Masters would also set up scenarios designed to confuse or humiliate their slaves for entertainment. This could involve constantly changing the rules or setting the enslaved individuals up to fail regardless of their actions. Sadistic acts of cruelty. Some slaveholders descended into the chasm of sadism, deriving pleasure from inflicting unimaginable pain and suffering upon their enslaved individuals. One of the most horrific manifestations of this sadism was the deliberate infliction of physical harm through methods such as burning, mutilation, or prolonged periods of starvation and isolation. Enslaved individuals were subjected to unspeakable atrocities, their bodies bearing the scars of their master's depravity. Burning was a particularly brutal form of punishment, where slaves were subjected to the agony of flames as punishment for perceived infractions or simply as a means of asserting the master's power. Mutilation, such as cutting off limbs or branding, served as a chilling reminder of the enslaved individual's status as property, marked and disfigured at the whim of their owner. Prolonged periods of starvation or isolation were also employed as tools of torture, stripping the enslaved individuals of their humanity and reducing them to mere shells of their former selves. Denied sustenance and human contact, they were left to languish in a state of perpetual agony, their spirits broken by the relentless cruelty of their masters. It might be hard to believe that humanity has fallen to these lower standards, but it has. Did you know black slaves were even used for fun? While some justify this act as human labor, there is no justification for using slaves for entertainment. Let us know in the comments section, should the white master ever be forgiven? Would you like us to make more videos? If yes, please support us by subscribing to the Black History Archives and clicking the bell icon. You can also check out more videos on our channel.